So today's all about the life of an attack, from open source package all the way to SOC alert. And with me today, I'm very excited that not only I get to interview my boss, but we're also bringing back a panelist we've had before. So with us today, we have VP of Product Management, Erik Thoen, and today we have SVP of Engineering, Igor Lasic. So before we dive in, I'd like for the listeners at home to get a little bit to know you guys better. So Erik, since you're new here, why don't you go first?
My name is Erik Thoen. Great to see all of you today. Thank you for joining the webinar. I lead up our product management and product marketing functions here at ReversingLabs. In particular, my team handles aspects of the Spectra Assure community and Spectra Assure product targeted towards many of the challenges that we'll be talking about today, as well as working closely with Igor on the malware analysis and threat hunting products we have.
Thanks for being here. Igor, why don't you reintroduce yourself to the folks at home?
Hi, I'm Igor Lasic. I'm SVP of Engineering, as Katie mentioned. I'm not only building the products, I'm also keenly aware of the problems with software supply chain and even how to mitigate them as I head the IT security at ReversingLabs.
Thanks for coming back. We're so glad to have you again. I know last time I took away a lot of gems of wisdom from our conversation, so it's a treat to have you back. So let's dive into today. We've all seen, tons of different supply chain attacks happening, especially last year in July, right? We had that whole NPM week from hell, for lack of a better word, where we saw a lot of these issues happening, but they often permeate not only just from the developer lens, but they also permeate and bubble up to SOC alerts. So today I'd like to understand, not only how a malicious package enters into these repos, but how we trace what happens through these compromised dependencies, moves through CI/CD, and really lands and ultimately triggers that SOC investigation. So to start, what does a typical NPM supply chain attack look like today? And really, how has that changed over the past few years? Erik, do you want to start with this one?
Sure, absolutely. So we do a lot of research around these types of attacks as we work to both identify them, but then also understand how best to mitigate them. When you look at NPM in particular, a very popular package repository, and there have been a number of different types of supply chain attacks that have happened there. Probably the most common is a direct compromise of some of those developers that are posting the packages. The package gets compromised and then users consume it. In some cases, there are name squatting techniques where you go to the wrong place to something that sounds similar. Or in some cases, there might be dependency confusion. That is another technique that many of these attackers will use to compromise very popular repositories.
Yeah, good point. Igor, anything to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, the OSS attacks, they're nothing new. We've observed them at ReversingLabs for probably a decade. But they used to be more around malicious code, malicious binaries being embedded in like installers. Dell comes to mind. Attackers are always trying to find new avenues, and as security industry plugs particular holes, like Microsoft Documents, for example, that was a really popular vector for a long time. They've stumbled upon the OSS because majority of the OSS is out there on the GitHub, and the actual maintainers have a very lax security standards. So besides the type squatting, as Erik mentioned, there is just a general ease of penetrating those repositories and inserting your malicious code in there. And as folks kind of build their own code, they pull in the malicious one and infect themselves.
Well, and one of the things that as a company, ReversingLabs has done is start to monitor the state of software supply chain. And in this year's report, what we found was a 73% increase in malicious open source packages. So this is definitely a threat vector that's increasing very dramatically and happening, as you're referring to, Katie, on very, very, top 10, top 100 packages within the repository. It's not just down on the long tail. These are very popular, widely used packages that can be compromised.
Yeah, and I think, if you have to think about it, we're all looking to protect what we have, right? But when you're looking at it from the hacker's lens, they want to get into those top 10 packages because that's where they know it's going to be most lucrative for them. So we have to really start thinking about, what are those security measures we have to put in place? And to Igor's point, I'd really like to drill into is how do malicious packages or compromised maintainers have this slip into the ecosystem in the first place? Because there is a few ways that we've talked about this. But we even saw with the Quicks hack over the summer, a maintainer was compromised, and we're starting to see that more and more frequently in the open source ecosystem. It's not unique to one, language or system. Any thoughts on that, Igor?
Yeah, I mean, it very often starts with sort of human attacks. Humans are always the weakest links, as we know. So humans can be hacked, giving out their credentials, or credentials are very simple. There is also more sophisticated ways of obtaining credentials, or sometimes it's just maintainer pulling in a pull request that is just not reviewed properly. So it's really sort of wide open. But the actual methods of obtaining credentials or getting in there vary with humans as a primary vector.
Yeah. I mean, I know from what I've seen, especially on the news, and Erik, maybe you have some comments on this, but we've seen it done through a variety of different things, whether it's like a phishing campaign or a developer tooling being compromised. There's just so many different avenues that you have to think about constantly, which kind of seems like a lot to juggle at one time. Erik, any thoughts on that?
Well, I think you were referring to the Kicks one where, ANSI Styles' top 10 package was compromised. In that particular case, he was compromised with a phishing email. So it's exactly what Igor is talking about. They targeted that person because they know he's maintaining certain very large packages. And they'll use a lot of effort to create a very, very convincing, I think in that case, it was actually a mobile phishing attack, a very convincing method to be able to compromise these people that are so high value. They can compromise that. Their threat will go out to probably millions, across the world potentially. So it's a very targeted attack towards something that will have a very, very large impact.
Yeah, I think the other one worth noting that was just pretty remarkable to me in terms of like the scope of the attack vector was the XEUtils one. And that was to Igor's point about people putting in PRs. It's like you submit a couple good PRs so the maintainer trusts you, and then all of a sudden you have the keys to the kingdom and can just wreak havoc. So that's also like another one that stands out in my mind as to how they kind of got in with these maintainers. So we've talked about, the different variety of methods these folks can use, but what signals should we be listening to early on, whether you're a developer or maintainer, that we often miss that could be key indicators that something has gone amiss?
That goes back to your basic cybersecurity practices. A lot of the times these folks actually reach out to CNC servers. Sometimes you have like weird behavior of the binary. Once you compile it, it just goes to places it shouldn't. It asks for cleavages it shouldn't. There's also static methods that we utilize to find them. And in the cases where we actually detected them, it was all done through our own code detection. So you didn't have to look at behavioral things like CNC communication or asking for privileges and things of that sort. But the most of the folks actually look at X or their favorite avenues to get notified. Majority of the folks, especially in development, are not necessarily security aware, so they really have besides doing some type of code scanners, they don't have a lot of other tooling.
Yeah. Erik, any thoughts on that? Because I know we've always seen, developers typically don't have security front of mind, right? You're trying to go fast, release those features, but security also wants to make sure we're secure and we're not wanting to scan and scold you, right? Like that's the time old tale of like scan and scold, you have to go fix things, let's redo things. And that's not what we want to advocate for, right? There has to be that happy medium.
Absolutely. And I think that's one of the challenges that we face today is the nature of these supply chain attacks have evolved in such a way that they're closer to the malware that Igor was talking about. So Reversing Labs has been doing malware detection for 16 years. And originally that tended to be executables that people were giving to others and would happen on your computer. Now it's turned into these supply chain attacks, but many of the techniques that you would use to find these traditional types of attacks can be applied to these packages that you might have as part of your supply chain. So accordingly, it can get very complicated, but some of the tools that we offer based on our analysis engine are powerful ways to do that. So, for example, with Inspector Assure, we develop what are called either threat hunting rules or differential analysis policies that allow you to see differences between versions that you're running to kind of pull out that needle in the haystack that Igor was talking about. You have to notice that something was inserted that might be malicious in some way, that has a behavior that you're not expecting. And so having tools that allow you to see that easily is one of the best ways to understand if something's happening. You have to make that consumable to the constituencies that you're talking about. You don't want to add a lot of friction as you're trying to deliver software. So turning those into actionable policies, I think, is one of the best ways to be able to make it more consumable to many of these constituencies.
I think consumability is the nail on the head, right? Because you have to make sure the audience who's getting these reports are looking at these different dashboards, whatever it is. It has to speak a language that means something to them and also give them actionable insights, right? A lot of these tools are great, but if you can't take any action on it, it's like, what are you doing with this, right? It's nice to have, but you want to be able to not only find that needle, but know what to do next, right? So that was a really good point. I like that. So we've talked about how it enters the ecosystem, right, and gets into your system. Let's move on to CI/CD because I think that's also a crucial part of where these things can happen, right? Once a malicious dependency or whatever is pulled into the build, let's talk about what actually happens and where do teams usually think they're safer in the CI/CD than where they actually are. Igor, do you want to start here? I know you run a large engineering team, so I feel like you might have some thoughts on this.
Yeah, it's kind of similar theme of folks being unaware. So you have to create policies for them. Most of the developers just go and get the sort of top of the NPM version and use it without any regard to security. So you have to protect yourselves from humans again. So first thing you do is you typically want to delay the NPM versions you pull down. Have your own repository of NPMs as well is very, very useful. And then sort of going into scanning from sort of hooks in the push git push to ensure that you don't push compromised code. You can do some basic scanning on the developer machine to then like very comprehensive scanning during the build process and checking the artifacts. And so it's kind of multi-layered approach. You have to put a lot of things in place.
You can't just be one-stop shop of like, this is all we're doing. This is the only gate we have. You have to have like a multi-prong approach.
Yeah, then we go into all this SAST, RAST, DAST. I mean, you kind of have to implement everything if you want to be super secure. And it's very dependent on the repository as well. So again, you have to have somebody that wants to delve into the topic, come up with the policies and approaches, and then implement what makes sense for you. We've found that like a pretty simple approach is just delaying versions and blocking folks from getting the tip of the OSS repositories. That's like you'll be relatively safe because there's a lot of focus on these attacks, and security companies, including ourselves, are going to find it. But if you're pulling the tip, you just might get affected.
Yeah. And that's something we've seen, especially in the past few years, of like, don't go with the latest.
Yeah.
Don't be living on the edge to the max. You want to live on the edge, but like close to it. You don't want to live totally on the edge because that's where you might get burned. So that's an example
I was
of
going to
where.
say, it's great working with a security expert like Igor on the engineering side because he gets all this. The counterpoint to that is exactly what you were all saying, which is many organizations don't have that security-centric knowledge. And so I know when the Chalk compromise occurred, there was a great Wiz blog that was tracking how quickly that was deployed. So there's all this automation in their cloud pipelines to get out to SaaS. A compromise happens. It was, the maintainer, I think it fixed it in like 2 hours or something like that. But in the meantime, something like 10% of the monitored cloud environments already had deployed. So they take the latest thing, they push it immediately without, that delay that Igor is talking about. And now the compromise is live on production systems all over the place. And that window might be enough for those, hackers to be able to then compromise all these systems that are doing that in production. So it's a very, too much automation can actually hurt you. Well, I guess the automation is good, but selecting the tip of the spear, as Igor was talking about, is where you can really get caught because there hasn't been a chance to evaluate the security associated with that particular dependency.
I will say that there's never enough automation.
I agree with you. I shouldn't just automation. Yes, you have to be careful about the policies around what you're automating. Maybe that's the better way to put it.
And I think to both of your points about, the top of the spear is I read a recent study where it said within 15 minutes of a known vulnerability being out or a malware, like hackers are already searching the internet for who has that deployed. So you really realistically have a 15-minute window from the time that thing is live to when it could come in and infect your system, which is crazy to me because 15 minutes is not that long.
It's all automated.
Yeah. There you go. The more you know by Igor.
I mean, unrelated this, but it's open close stuff that's super popular these days. So folks are putting it out. They're using these free services to deploy them. And guess what? I know from our experience that our servers that are live on the internet, I mean, they get pulled in real time, non-stop. Like you're getting pulled, like you're saying, for vulnerabilities 24/7, every second of the day. So yes, they will pop you if you are, I guess, not security conscious, to put it nicely.
I like it. So how do tools like artifact repositories, and Igor, you had alluded to this before, how do tools like artifact repositories and dependency managers help in these situations? And where do they also create blind spots potentially?
So they help because they sit between the OSS repositories and your own developers. So in old days, you had your own local RPM repository. It's the same concept. You basically have your own repository of dependencies you're managing yourself. So that gives you a layer of protection. And so you can control the software coming in that you build your software with. That's why it's helpful. It's basically a layer of separation from the live environments.
Okay.
Plus,
Erik, anything to add?
yeah, sorry. Plus, some of these repositories already have built-in scanning, so that's convenient as well.
Well, and to add to that, you made the point earlier, Igor, you need that control, but then you have to have policies on that control that make sense as well. Just because you have a local version of something by itself doesn't necessarily protect you. But if you have policies that mean that you either scan first, or you delay adoption of a new version, or you only allow certain approved versions after some level of review, that can become a very powerful control to prevent that from happening. I think the other blind spot that it's natural to us in the malware business, less natural to a lot of people out there that are producing software, is the time to detection as well. And Igor referred to this. people push something out they don't realize is bad, someone's going to find it. Usually it's pretty quick, but there's a delay. So when you do your first scan on something that comes in, it might come clean, and then someone figures out what's wrong. When you do the second scan a day later or something like that, it might now be bad because we've figured out what that attack is, how to detect it, and how to know to detect it in the future. So even with those controls in place, you actually have to be very vigilant and recheck on a regular basis, or rescan those components regularly, or see if someone's reported a particular compromise associated with this. So there's a level of constant scanning and awareness that you also have to bake into some of the policies and procedures that you're doing when you consider these different artifacts.
Yeah, it's like a constant feedback loop, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, this is something I'm interested in. When does this actually become a SOC problem? Not like the socks you wear, but the SOC in most cybersecurity, shops or sections of a company. When is a compromised package? Is it already does this happen like when it's on the developer machine, or is this like when it happens in a production system? Is there a natural flow of where this alert pops up, or can it vary?
I think both are very relevant. We have many customers that are very interested in understanding if the developers have downloaded something compromised, have it on their local machine, and now it's causing a problem. Shai-Hulud was a perfect example of that, where you're talking about a worm. Once it gets into your environment, that's a problem. It's going to propagate. You're going to have to look for it. So now the SOC is sitting there worried that some developer machine is compromised inside their organization. The same thing is true on production. We talked about the automation case especially for these cloud applications, where they pull, automatically deploy. Now it's in their production instance. Maybe behind that production instance, there's important customer data or other things that could be compromised. That's undoubtedly a threat. So I actually think both of them are very important and are under the direct concern of the SOC and the operation centers associated with the production systems as well. But Igor probably lives it more than I do on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah, I mean, there's a Chinese wall between the development and SOC. I mean, they're totally unaware of each other's actions and worries and whatnot. So SOC is, like, from my experience, totally unaware of this problem. So that's the bridge we're trying to gap through ReversingLabs wants to close the gap, because we have kind of both sides. We have very strong software analysis side, and we have a very strong SOC side. So we are uniquely positioned to fix this gap. Anyway, so today, actually, we've seen this from our customers. So if a SOC actually finds out about the problem, because SOC guys are trained to follow the threads and on X and whatnot, to have up-to-date real-time information about threats. So they're trained to proactively look out for threats and create defenses. So we've seen our customers reach out to us and say, like, well, yeah, that's great. NPM package 1.359 is compromised. Like, what do I do with that? And we know what to do with that. It's called hashes. So we know that 159 whatever package has particular files in it and with unique signatures, and we know what they are. So we actually provided packages of these hashes signatures to our customers, to the SOC personnel, so they can punch them into their systems and find who's been compromised, and also make sure that they're not going to show up again. So SOC personnel has abilities to scan all the endpoints for presence of these hashes, and that's a well-known protection. So we are uniquely positioned at ReversingLabs to kind of both tell you what's compromised on the software side, and then provide you protections for the SOC side for the endpoints as well.
So I think that's a good point. You can find it on two different sides of it. Why would a developer maybe know before a SOC team, or vice versa?
It depends who gets it first. So that's, I mean, that's the honest answer. And again, like developers do have a blind spot on like security. So like most likely the SOC guy will be like monitoring these X threads and be like, oh, Shai Halud, what the heck? What do I do? And go to developers and say, are you guys using this npm blah 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 159? And you try to figure it out. And again, we do this all the time on if I put my ITsec hat on, like we do this all the time. We look for these npm packages, versions, and stuff like that. This is very, very common. The SolarWind comes to mind, and some of the Java packages that were compromised a few years back. We had to go and do deep research on our servers to ensure that the compromised packages were not present and apply fixes if they were.
So let's talk about that. What does an average like investigation look like into one of these types of attacks? How does that start? What context is usually missing? Who are the key players in an investigation?
Well, first is detection. Like it typically comes honestly through these threads from vendors that tell you about an attack, and the maintainers who advertise that they detected something and here's the fixed version, whatever it may be. So detection part is actually difficult, but community does provide you the signals. So you kind of monitor the signals and then you react to them. From our ITsec team actually monitors that, not the developers. Developers will detect it, as Erik is saying, through their CI/CD pipeline 24 hours later, 36 hours later, when they scan the software. So in my mind, the protection, the first signal comes to SOC. And then they figure out the packages that are affected, get the hashes, and then they start looking for them. And then they involve the developers, again, to figure out if these packages are used in the first place. Have we pulled down the bad version and things of that sort.
And to just, follow up on several of Igor's points, the idea that the language the SOC's using, the language the development teams are using, and the way they talk about and think about these things are very, very different. I'm over on the SOC side, and I'm thinking about IOCs and hashes. Okay, that's the language they're using. Or on the development side, it's like pearls and versions, like, and there actually is a mapping between the two, but actually very few organizations do that. It's only by virtue of the way that, ReversingLabs has constructed our portfolio of solutions that we're actually in an excellent position to do that. So we happen to use the same engine for both of our sets of products. So the outputs, the indexing, all that stuff's the same. So we'll get very consistent results across our portfolio. And then you tune those results for developers with our community and our Spectre Assure products, and they'll be consistent, and they'll mention a hash that you can index to over to analyze in our intelligence products, which the SOC would use. And so I think our portfolio allows a little bit of overlap and indexing between those two that should allow better communication between the groups, but naturally they're very isolated. I would say the other thing, and this was, Igor was referring to this earlier, we had several customers, especially after Shai Halud, that are, they're SOC teams or incident response teams or threat hunting teams. They're trying to figure out this thing, Shai Halud, and what to look for. They were looking for IOCs. One of the things that we actually created in response to that was a supply chain IOC feed. They're used to getting a feed, a stream of information of the stuff they should look for. They want the IOCs so they can drop it into their SIM, their EDR, to figure out if some developer downloaded this thing that's bad, and now it's propagating across their entire environment, so that they can do an instant response, close that down, eliminate it from the environment altogether. On the developer side, you should push to the left to stop it from ever coming in. So like your mitigation is a little bit different in the two cases, but they're just using different nomenclature. They're not thinking the same. The developer's thinking, oh, the newest version's better. I got some feature, function, whatever. So they're pushing to go forward. And the SOC team's trying to catch up sometimes to make sure that you're not taking something that would lead to a security compromise.
I think that's interesting because both of you pointed out it's like you're talking about the same things, but just different lenses and different nomenclature. So it's kind of, if you think about it, to kind of dumb it down, it's like English versus Spanish, we're both rooted in Latin. You know what I mean? So there is that common root there. But it's just, a different word for a different word.
For
There you
Croatian
go.
language,
Yeah, maybe. So I think that's interesting. So we've talked about how we've moved from like source, CI/CD, how the investigation starts, and the context of it all. How can better package intelligence or binary analysis really, because this is something we've brought up, is it comes down to that binary analysis or hash, shorten the investigation time and really help to maybe reduce panic? Or some of those heart palpitations that people might be feeling when it's, day of these types of activities. And Erik, why don't you go first on this one?
I think I put them in different categories based on where you are in your, sort of CI/CD diagram. Over on the left-hand side, the approach that we're taking from the product development side is to think about intelligence to tell you what packages are safe. So you're going to take something from our Spectre Assure community that provides you unparalleled intelligence about things that are good or bad. You take that to decide how to enforce what packages you allow into your environment. You use what Igor is talking about, Nexus, Artifactory, something like that. Use a control based on good intelligence to prevent things from initially coming in. That sounds great, but there's many, many different avenues that things get into your organization on. We had many cases where developers kind of went around Artifactory, pulled something down, loaded into the build. There's a bunch of other things that can happen. So we also believe that binary analysis is very important. So prevent bad stuff from getting in, left-hand side. But then when you're about to ship, do a final build check. When you're about to ship, at that point in time, you put together this package. It might be an executable, it might be an RPM. There's all sorts of different forms that final package can take. But you want to make sure that in that final package, before you send it out to your customers, none of this other stuff could have happened. And that might be dependencies, but that could also be other forms of attacks that could have happened, within your environment as well. So we're mostly focused on open source here. That's very important, high threat vector, but there's other things too. And so you should do a final build check as well. So we really think those two things are complementary. Intelligence to help you as you select what you might incorporate, but then also binary analysis to allow you to make sure your final thing that you're shipping is safe and doesn't have any compromise in it.
Igor, what about you? I see you nodding your head along there.
Yeah, it just, again, it goes to kind of layered approach between the two teams and in coordination and things of that sort. I really have nothing to add to what Erik said. I think he explained it really well.
Perfect. So we've talked about a lot today. So I have, just a final question for you guys is, if you could change one thing about how developers or AppSec or SOC teams are collaborating, during these incidents, what would it be and why?
I think
It's a
I would
loaded
say
question.
get them to collaborate more, right? As we were saying earlier, they tend to be very isolated and almost combative. Like, I don't want the security guy telling me what to do. I'm trying to work fast and deliver new features and capabilities. So that's a mentality many people have. Security guys, why are these guys doing all this crazy stuff? Like, they shouldn't be using that. They shouldn't be using this. If they work together, it can be very powerful. We do have some customers where they do work together well. And as we talked about, our product portfolio is designed to work that way, and it can be very beneficial, because what can happen is, as you're developing something, as it comes out, maybe you're doing that final build check and you find something. Well, what you probably should do at that point in time is, of course, don't ship it. But then you should probably pull in that incident response team. You should probably pull in that SOC team to figure out, well, if there's something bad in this thing I'm shipping, how did it get there? Was it through a dependency? Was it through an insider? Was it through some other binary? Who knows where it came from? That's a logical place where you want to work those two groups to work together, because they're not entirely dependent. They're talking about the same types of threats, just in different language, and their primary job role is differently. So in my mind, if they can really collaborate together, that's the way they're going to be the most secure.
Yeah. Igor, your thoughts?
I'm gonna go out there.
Oh,
So I grew up in a time when we built ourselves everything. So we would build entire software grounds up. There was no OSS. So therefore, none of these problems. So now we're in a position where 80% of the software is open source. So you can get popped 80% of the time. Um, I see a future where actually we kind of we will start to slide back, where folks will actually build their own software using the Gen AI and whatnot. So this, I don't know. Again, I'm just out there right now. Anyways, I mean, I think the DevSecOps practice is attempting to bridge the two, but even the DevSecOps is still very focused on dev and kind of putting the dev stuff into cloud and whatever. To me, maybe the DevSecOps have to be more sec than ops and dev, and be more aware of the IOCs related to the packages, and they should be sort of the advocate and partner to the sec guys. Dev guys, as Erik's saying, they just want to build and ship. They really everything else is slowing them down. So they're not like a natural partner. But DevSecOps, given that they have a sec in their name and they have to be security aware, I think they're a more natural partner. So they should be this bridge between the two.
yeah, I couldn't have said that any better. Even though it doesn't seem like a natural partner, I think developers still have a seat at that table just because there is so many of them, but we need to start having a security advocate, I think, oftentimes like invested in the team,
Yeah.
as well as not only like helping explain why they're doing certain things or maybe mentoring to become more security front of mind. But I think context is key in the world we live in. So oftentimes having that knowledge and a person on the team will help drive that right behavior.
Yeah.
So, Joanna, who's our big eye in the sky, we're going to put up our 5 key takeaways from today. Erik and Igor, I can't say thank you enough for taking the time to explain these things to me. It's always great to have you there. But for those of you at home, there are 5 key takeaways that I just want to quickly pop up onto the screen. So it's know what's in your binary. We talked a lot about binaries today, and it's helpful to understand what's in it and how it's behaving. You want to make sure you're inspecting that final binary to make sure it's behaving the way you want and you're not seeing anything amiss. SBOM and vulnerability threat intelligence is also helpful for when you are getting to those final stages, just making sure you have the right things and things that should be in there and not any rogue dependencies maybe in there. And then lastly, we just want to make sure, as we talked about, right, choose your upgrades wisely. Igor brought up the whole tip of the spear, right? So you want to make sure you're living on the edge, but maybe not quite the tip of the spear when you are selecting those upgrades. And then scan early and approve. Scan and approve early and often, right? So you want to make sure you have that continuous feedback loop that Erik was talking about, where you are scanning and adjusting things as need be. So the last one, though, is the most key, right? That's the remediation plan. So when these things happen, we want to make sure we're constantly learning and we constantly have that remediation plan in check. And everybody knows what their role is in these plans, because when something happens, we want to make sure you can activate your team and they know exactly what the task is ahead of them. So for those of you at home, thanks for tuning in. We're going to get to the Q&A portion with Igor and myself in a minute. Thanks.